Hello, dear listener. My name is Rose, and I am the writer, director, etc. / general creator of this podcast audio drama thing. Sorry about the delay in getting these episodes out. Thank you so much for your kind patience and support. I would like to welcome you to our 5th season of the Wessex dramas with an adaptation of Thomas Hardy's novel, The Trumpet Major. As with our last few stories, this is of course a romance story with some light-hearted bits. Our heroine Anne has to choose from 3 different suitors of 3 varying levels of suitableness, all while King George and his entire court comes to their small town of Weymouth to survey the possible invasion of Napoleon. As you do. So pop on your mob cap, loosen your stays, and vaguely curse at the French, and let's sit down to watch the unfortunate attempts at young romance to blossom.
Miller's Garden, evening. There is a knock on the front door and, in the waning light, the miller emerges and throws himself at Uncle Benjy.
"Oh, Bob, my son, you've come.
Uncle Benjy wrenches himself away. There is a sound of laughing and merriment from inside of the house.
Scrouchy door, Miller. Look to my poor old shoulder. What's the matter?
We've had a letter that Bob is here."
The farmer nods.
Aye, and 2,000 of Boney's gunboats is coming as well. We shall have them here next few weeks. Now look, Miller, I know thee to be an honest man.
He pulls the miller out into the garden.
I've come to ask you a favour. Will you take care of my poor title deeds and such like while I'm away from home next week? I don't want Boney to get 'em.
The miller nods.
"Indeed I will, dairyman. 'Tis no trouble. Now, you'll come in for a cider then? I have a few friends over."
The farmer wrings the miller's hand.
No, I thank thee, neighbour. I shall ride over with the deeds, though next week.
He nods and returns to his pony. Mill, sitting room, evening. Loveday returns to his sitting room and Mrs. Garland, together with 5 of his friends, to find his son, John, returned with Anne, who is just sitting down, whilst John pours her a cider.
"John, and Mistress Anne, you had a view of the king then?"
"Indeed, father, and we also rambled along to the harbour and discovered that the Peewit had just come in."
"Wonderful. I'll go and meet Bob then, as he said he's here."
He looks around questioningly.
"Will ye come along, neighbours? 'Tis still light. Ladies?"
"We will, Mr. Loveday. We'll just get our bonnets."
Mrs. Garland and Anne hurry away, and the other guests start getting up and tidying mugs, etc. Mrs. Garland's house, hallway, evening. Mrs. Garland is standing in the hallway, trying on her bonnet, with her little maid, Hannah, offering up her shawl to her. She shouts up the stairs.
"Anne, are you coming?"
Anne shouts back down.
"I'm nearly ready, Mother. I'll just be another couple of minutes. You go on first and I'll catch up to you in a minute."
"All right, love."
Mrs. Garland accepts the shawl and smiles at the girl.
"Have your supper now, Hannah. We shouldn't be more than a couple of hours or so. Remember to trim the wick off the lantern if you go off to bed,
She turns to go and then turns back.
Oh, and don't forget to bank up the fire."
Yet again, she turns to go, but turns back.
"Oh, and do put Tibbles out as well, and—"
Hannah puts out her hand containing an old, black umbrella.
"Your umby, miss."
"Oh, yes,
She wanders out. Mrs. Garland's house, Anne's bedroom, evening. Anne, already bonneted, is sitting on the side of her bed. She reaches into the drawer of her bedside cabinet, which she has just opened, and she withdraws a folded piece of paper which she opens. In this paper there is a golden curl of hair. Anne sighs and smiles, while meditating on her lover's curl. She then sighs happily again, replaces the paper in her drawer, and grabs her shawl and reticule from the bed, and then dashes out of the door. Road outside of Miller's house. Evening. Montage. A handsome young man, Bob, in a sailor's suit, arrives on a cart, sitting next to the young carter. Bob jumps down, and he and the carter unload all of Bob's belongings and dump them outside of the front door. Bob pays the carter, who drives away. Bob knocks several times on the door, but there is no response. Bob decides to move all of the belongings around to the back door for safety. So he keeps disappearing around the back of the house with his chattels and then reappearing for the next item. By the back door, Bob looks up at an open window and then a nearby apple tree. He fetches a plank stacked near others by a shed and places it in the apple tree fork and walks across, gaining access to the house via the open window. Bob then sets about fetching eggs and bacon from the larder and then cooking a big fry-up with mushrooms and onions. He is just dishing out food onto the plate when the miller and his friends return. There is great backslapping and hugging amongst the miller, Bob, and the friends. Dining room, night. David, the miller's servant, sets out cutlery in the dining room, and the guests all fall to and eat a hearty supper. They are just finishing when there is a tap at the dining room door, and the widow Garland appears with Anne behind her.
Sorry to bother you, neighbour, but we've been hearing muttering at the back door through the hedge and think that there must be robbers lurking. Anne and I have been most frightened.
The miller has arisen, as have his friends.
Mrs. Garland, this is my son Bob. He and I will attend to this misbehaviour.
And I too.
Mrs. Garland and Anne curtsy, and Bob bows and then snatches up his cudgel, as do the miller, David, and all of the guests. They all tiptoe out into the kitchen. Kitchen, night. Bob goes first, and suddenly snatches open the kitchen door, and there, on the floor, sees his own luggage. He steps back in surprise.
Oh, good gracious. It's my luggage, which I'd quite forgot.
He turns back.
You needn't worry, Mrs. Garland. Your robbers are only parrots.
He lifts up the parrot's cage, whisks off the cloth, and exhibits the parrots, who mutter and ruffle their feathers. There is great hilarity and comment amongst the party, and they all help to carry in Bob's luggage.
I've a few bits for you, Father.
Bob delves into his chest and hands over a package to his father, which proves to be a beautiful pipe and a big packet of tobacco.
Why, thank ye, son. You shouldn't have wasted your wage on me, though.
Bob smiles and pulls 2 fine shawls out of his seaman's chest.
One of these is for Miss Matilda Johnson of Southampton, whom I'm to wed. But perhaps you'd accept one yourself, Miss Anne.
Wed? Oh, no. No, thank you. Really, I couldn't.
Now I think on it, didn't we used to be sort of sweethearts? And didn't you keep a lock of my hair?
Did I? Oh, I don't remember.
Bob pulls some ribbons out in a big bunch in tissue paper.
I was going to give these to Tilly, but perhaps you'd accept some instead of the shawl, Miss Anne.
Perhaps it would be better if they went to Miss Johnson.
Bob thrusts them at Anne.
Well, you could have some of them first, Miss Anne.
Anne fires up with tears in her eyes.
What? Like some sort of consolation prize?
Anne throws the ribbons on the floor.
You best bestow your gifts where you bestow your love, Mr. Loveday.
She runs out. Bob turns to Mrs. Garland.
I didn't mean to offend, Mrs. Garland.
He hands her over one of the shawls.
Perhaps you'd accept this for yourself.
Thank you, Bob. I'd be happy to.
She puts the shawl on and smiles. Mrs. Garland's house, Anne's bedroom, night. Anne, in her nightgown, is brushing her hair at the drawing table when her similarly nightgowned as well as shawled mother comes in. Her mother gently takes the brush from Anne and continues with the brushing.
What a close girl you are. I'm sure that I never knew that Bob Loveday and you would walk together. You must have been mere children.
Oh, yes, so we were. It was when we first came here, about a year after Father died.
Oh.
We did not walk together in any regular way, Mother.
No.
I always thought the Lovedays were a bit, well, you know, rough.
Well, Mr. Loveday will wear that apron everywhere.
Anne, irritably, takes back her hairbrush from her mother, turns away somewhat, finishes off a few strokes, and then starts to plait her hair.
It was nothing, Mother. Nothing at all. Really.
Mother smiles and retires.
Yes, dear. Nothing at all, dear.
Anne scowls at her mother retreating form whilst irritably plaiting. Miller's house, sitting room, night. The miller and Bob are sitting over the fire having their tankard of nightcap.
So, Bob, do he tell me about this young woman of thine? Matilda, what's her name?
Well, she's an excellent body, a good comely woman. She can throw her hair into the nicest curls, and she's got splendid gowns and headcloths.
And how long did you say you knew her?
Oh, a fortnight.
'Tisn't very long, son.
Oh, if I could see in the twinkling of an eye that she was a miracle of good breeding.
How many did you choose her out from then, lad?
Bob sits back in his chair.
Well, she was the only woman I happened to know in Southampton, but it would have been the same if I'd known 500.
Her father's in business?
Oh, I didn't see her father, and I think her mother's dead. But she has a rich aunt living in Melchester, where she's gone to collect her things. I'm meeting her at the King's Arms, Casterbridge, on Sunday.
Well, he must take the trap to fetch her then, lad.
Bob drains his tankard, gets up and pats his father on the shoulder.
Thanks, father.
The miller looks up fondly and pats his son's head as it rests on the miller's shoulders.
I'll do the best I can to give you a good wedding feast, son, and we'll put her up here then, a while.
Meal day. Montage. The miller and Mrs. Garland standing, inspecting, talking and deciding about the dining and sitting rooms. John arriving, entering the garden, and Bob looking up and asking John's opinion about the trap which he is inspecting. Mrs. Garland in her work cap giving various changing instructions to the miller, David and the young boy, who are confusedly pushing furniture about past each other and getting in each other's way. John and Bob coming out of the general store carrying paint varnish and brushes. Bob is comparing 3 different colours of cans reflectively and asking John's opinion. John looks a bit doubtful. Dave is scrubbing floorboards in the sitting room, and the miller is polishing the grandfather clock's hands, whilst Mrs. Garland is dusting the inside of cupboards, sneezing and flapping her hands over the dust. John is polishing up the horse harness, and Bob is painting the gig, with his tongue out. There is more paint on Bob than on the gig. Mrs. Garland is tiredly wiping her forehead whilst chopping herbs in the kitchen. She looks up with dismay and regards the many apples which she has yet to chop on the table. She sighs. John and the miller come into the kitchen, chivying a tall, brawny soldier before them, who smiles, removes his jacket, and rolls up his sleeves. The soldier then smiles at Mrs. Garland, picks up the peeler, and starts peeling the apples, with practised speed. The miller and John smile encouragingly at Mrs. Garland, who smiles gratefully back at them, saying, "Thank you." Casterbridge, public house, day. Bob is sitting on his gig by the edge of the road, with a youth standing in front, holding the reins for him. Bob is anxiously looking up and down the road for Matilda. A large wagon, half full of hay, draws up, pulled by a couple of dray horses. Matilda is sitting on the back, smiling at him. She is very beautiful, in her early 30s, and is dressed in a many-flounced and ruffled green striped outfit, and has a smallish box. Bob jumps down from his gig, smiling, as Matilda steps down from the wagon, takes up her box, and thanks the farmer, who then drives away. Bob rushes across, takes her in his arms, and gives her a hearty kiss on her lips. Matilda pulls away urgently, rights her green striped hat, and feigns shock at Bob. She holds out her box for Bob to carry, which he takes.
La, Mr. Loveday, whatever will people think?
It was Bob not long ago, my dear Matty. And why did you come in that old wagon when I gave you the money for the coach?
They walk across to Mr. Loveday's gig, and Bob hands Matilda up, stows the box, and mounts the cart, taking up the reins from the boy, nodding to him, and they drive away.
Now, you wouldn't want a future wife who wasn't frugal with her money now, would you, Mr. Roberts?
Bob gazes lovingly at her as she satisfiedly smooths down her brand new gown on which she had spent his travel money.
Bob, just your plain Bob.
Matilda pouts provocatively and conditionally. She gets out her fan, flicks it open, and flutters her eyelashes veiledly and affectedly half over it.
That depends on how an ickle man treats his ickle sweet lady then, doesn't it?
Bob gurns spoonily and drives off. Road out of Casterbridge, day. Matilda is picking bits of hay from her rather overdone, heavily beret-boned green satin gown.
Have you only got that small box then, Matty?
Oh, I left the rest of my stuff with my aunt. You know, the rich one.
She looks around uninterestedly.
Is this your watering place a large city then?
Bless you, my dear. No, 'twould be nothing if it weren't for the royal family, their court, army, frigates, musicians, actors and the like.
Matilda looks up at the word actors.
Oh, is Allison paying decent wages this season then?
Bob looks at her as they bowl along.
I thought you said you didn't know anything about actors and stuff.
No. I've just read about Budmouth and, you know, the theatres in the papers, you know.
Would you maybe enjoy it if I took you to a theatre then, Matty?
Matilda looks a little green about the gills and smiles in a ghastly fashion.
Oh, yes, that would be very nice.
Of course. I realise that a nice lady like you has probably never been to a theatre.
Oh, no, never.
But you'd be safe with me.
He turns to her and pats her head. Matilda smiles alongside, affectedly and winningly to Bob.
Thank you, my dear Captain. Bob.
He smiles back soppily, and they continue along the leafy lane with the birds singing loudly. Miller's house, garden, day. As Bob hands Matilda down and through the garden gate, the miller steps forwards, smiles, bows and wrings her hand.
Matilda, this is my father.
Matilda smiles, gives a small affected curtsy and then drops the smile and nods curtly to the woman standing behind him, Mrs. Garland.
Oh, how pretty! A real stream and real fowls and everything.
Well, I's welcome ye to it, Miss Matilda, and hope that you'll be very happy here.
A horned cow pokes its head near to Matilda and moos loudly for David so that he will milk her. Matilda jumps around and puts her hand on her chest.
La! What is that? A horrid bull! I hope I shan't faint.
Whoosh, Crumpler! She won't hurt 'ee, ma'am. She's as timid as a mouse and just wants to be milked.
Crumpler moos again, just as Anne returns from church and comes around the corner into the miller's garden. Matilda puts the back of her hand histrionically to her forehead.
I shall be gored to death.
Matilda surreptitiously and quickly ascertains that Bob is standing immediately behind her, and then she gracefully faints into his arms with a faintly audible bleating sigh. Bob very worriedly lowers her to the lawn, gets out his handkerchief, runs to dip it in the mill pool and wrings it out on her eyes and nose. Anne comes forward and bends down to Matilda.
Captain Loveday, the water is running down onto her silk neckerchief. Here.
Anne takes the hanky and wipes the water from Matilda's eyes and nose, accidentally wiping off a lot of Matilda's complexion and eye coloration. Anne, surprised, stops what she is doing, and Matilda recovers, snatches the hanky away from Anne and glares at her. The miller and Mrs. Garland help Matilda to her feet.
There. Thou's not used to country life, are you, my dear?
They start to walk her towards the house door.
I'm...
There is a loud trumpet call, and Matilda starts again and trembles.
Oh gosh, not another hideous country sound.
Oh, no. That just be a trumpet from the local camp a-blowing mess or picket or some other of those vagaries. Bob's brother John is the regiment's trumpet major. You'll happen meet him soon.
Bob takes Matilda from their hands and leads her into the house.
Won't tell them I arrived in the wagon, will you, my dear?
No, of course not.
They all go in.
That was an episode of The Trumpet Major, written by Thomas Hardy and adapted by me, Rose, and my co-writer, Amory Goldthorp. I would also like to thank our new and brave editor for this podcast, Ieva Grebliunaite. I would also like to thank our amazing cast, Mark Lucas, Oliver Hickey, Stephen Marshall, Izzy Lucas, Mike Staddon, Caro Joy, Dan Almond, Neil Highley, John Simpson, John Seal, Peter Allison, Alban O'Brien, and Peter Melstock. You can find us on YouTube under Rose Goldthorp Films. We are on Spotify, Google, and the Apple Podcasts. Theoretically. I wouldn't commit to that, but I'm trying. We also have our own website, the Wessex Dramas website, and also Rose Goldthorp Films if you want to know more updates on what's happening with our podcasts and movies. Also check out Rose Goldthorp on Instagram and Facebook, or sign up to our newsletters. Our premieres are coming soon. Brace yourselves, kids. And again, thank you so much for your hard work and support and patience and kindness, and see you next time.